The film begins by showing a man, Ben. Ben does not live alone in his minivan, but he is always accompanied by his girlfriend, Lena. Unfortunately, Lena can no longer accompany Ben because she must go to the city to complete her education. Therefore, Ben gave his girlfriend a weapon as a form of protection from the harsh realities of city life. Plus, he even told Lena that she should always prepare the weapon before going to bed and at bedtime. Long story short, Lena has gone to town and Ben has to do all his activities alone. However, Ben is not completely unemployed because he works as a professional guide for hunters in this area. Moreover, one of his acquaintances' sheriff informed him that there was a billionaire who wanted to hunt and required Ben's services. The man's name was Maddock and he was prepared to pay Ben $1,000 a day. How could you resist? Ben himself admits that he has never been paid so much in one day. In addition, Maddock has also prepared his own vehicle, which is a Mercedes-Benz G363 car worth $500,000. He uses a Steyr Scout 308, which is not a weapon commonly used by hunters. Without further ado, Ben and Maddock immediately went to the desert in the city. The location they came to was the best location for hunters who usually spent their free time. Maddock was actually looking for a desert sheep that couldn't be found anywhere else. When they arrived at the stopping point, they built a bonfire while chatting casually before starting the hunt that Maddock had been waiting for. As the morning came, Maddock, who was so excited, got up first to offer Ben a cup of coffee. Then, they immediately walked again to go to the rocky hill which is usually inhabited by desert sheep. However, it was during the trip that Maddock made Ben feel strange, in which he began firing his rifle at random. After seeing this, Ben assumed that Maddock was an amateur hunter who did not understand the rules of this place at all. And sure enough, when asked for a hunting license, Maddock instead offered Ben a few dollars as a sign of silence. Which is where that much money does not include the daily payment that Maddock had promised earlier. As a result, Ben cannot refuse the money and he decides to accompany Maddock as best as he can. So far, everything is fine, and there have been no significant problems for both sides. But that didn't last long. Maddock continued to ignore Ben's cues and began shooting. In fact, Maddock proudly thought he had just shot a desert sheep. But, as it turned out, what he shot was not a sheep, but an old man, Charlie. To be more specific, Charlie is a local wanderer who goes out every day hunting for unusual stuff. Charlie is a close friend of Ben himself, which of course this incident immediately made him shocked. It was clear that Maddock felt the same way as the person who took Charlie's life in an instant. From there, he could not do much other than waiting for Ben, who rushed to ask anyone for help. However, I'm not sure what Maddock was thinking at the time, but he instead shot Charlie's body again using a rifle belonging to Ben. In the end, Ben, who had arrived without getting any help, was immediately told by Maddock that this time there were two shooters who killed Charlie. That is the two of them. Well, Ben has been trapped indirectly by Maddock, and involved if Charlie's body has been autopsied by the sheriffs. So, Ben was surprised after hearing the explanation, and he was immediately offered a win-win solution by Maddock. Which in detail, Maddock will send Ben to a university and pay him a $300,000 per year living allowance until he graduates. To be honest, I think Ben will flatly refuse this offer. But he agreed to the agreement instead. And from there, Charlie's body was buried right away. And simply stacked with a number of rocks. Then Maddock and Ben got ready to continue their hunting activities and assumed that the incident had not really happened. However, as it turned out, Ben didn't really agree to their agreement, so he ended up trying to call an emergency call. But unfortunately, Maddock found out about it and the communication device was destroyed immediately. So, from now on, Ben must follow all orders made by Maddock without questioning. Starting from taking off his shirt, pants, shoes and all the equipment he was wearing, until he was forced to walk home without any food or drink. Logically, with the scorching heat of the sun directly on the skin in broad daylight like this, it was obvious that Ben wouldn't be able to last long and had to die of dehydration. As a result, Maddock immediately saw this and realized that he didn't need to kill Ben, which would only make him more guilty in the end. As time went on, Ben continued to follow the electricity pole that lined the area. Ben realized that this trip would end in vain. He didn't want to follow the electricity pole anymore. Then, he immediately changed direction at that moment. It is not known for sure where Ben wants to go, but what is clear is that he seems to understand what he must do in the next step. And it was true. Ben went to an excavation in the middle of the desert on purpose and then walked right into one of the gaps covered by rocks. Apparently, this hole leads to the hideaway of Charlie, who had previously been the victim of a shot from Maddock. In this base, Ben immediately took advantage of several items that he could use and also a map that Charlie had drawn. But unfortunately, Ben's exact location were realized by Maddock, who purposefully looked for a way through the hole, which led to one of the hidden cabin. Then, without any delay, Maddock entered the cabin and he began to hear noisy sound in the cabin. In other words, Ben's location was no longer safe. Moreover, Maddock had deliberately thrown some dynamite at him. As a result, Ben had no choice but to leave the cabin. With great pleasure, Maddock immediately greeted him at that very moment. This time, Ben is forced to stay on the home's path and not to get out of Maddock's sight. But still, Ben tried to avoid as much as possible even though his physical condition was so badly injured. Ben even deliberately went back into one of the rocks where he had used to chill with Charlie. By relying on the existing sofas, he immediately bandaged the soles of his feet to prevent them from becoming worse and peeling off. After his legs were bandaged, he continued to run so he could avoid being chased by Maddock. Ben quickly began to follow the directions from the map drawn by Charlie. And luckily, Ben's efforts were not in vain, because all this time Charlie had deliberately kept a catapult, several marbles and a map that led to the dig point of one jerry can of water. But, just as Ben was about to drink a little, the jerry can was deliberately shot by Maddock. Well, this time Ben can only surrender while being watched by Maddock, who is actually enjoying the suffering of others. With such pressure, it was clear that Ben could no longer continue his journey, and he had simply collapsed. To make sure that Ben is really dead or not, Maddock purposely fires several bullets at Ben at that very moment. In fact, he didn't wake up at all. Then Maddock immediately left the location. But it turned out that the situation was just a trick, because Maddock still saw Ben walking around. From there, Maddock began to get angry with Ben's trick, which he no longer wanted to let Ben escape alive. However, it is not easy to do, because Ben himself already knows every ins and outs in this area. Well, you can see for yourself that Ben went back into a hole and purposefully waited until night fell. Without feeling tired at all, Maddock was still waiting for Ben, who was hiding in the rocks. He also kept calling Ben and hoping that Ben would surrender to him. But as it turned out, Ben wasn't that stupid, because he had managed to get out of the other gap without noticed by Maddock. Furthermore, Ben dared to get close to Maddock's car. Then he took the time to put on a jacket. At that point, Maddock, who had just finished peeing, immediately realized that something odd had happened to his car. Starting from the passenger door that is not closed tightly, until the jacket that is no longer there. As a result, he relied on his instincts at the time, and it was true that Ben was immediately shocked when the car actually reversed suddenly. If Ben caught like this, there's no other way it can be done by Ben other than hiding in the rocks. He also had to try to avoid the dynamite explosion that Maddock threw at him repeatedly. Luckily, with his reflexes, Ben was able to get through it all, and he even managed to knock out Maddock with just one slingshot. In the morning, it was seen that Maddock had been successfully tied by Ben in the car. Ben didn't waste any time and went straight to the sheriff's office to report Maddock for his irresponsible behavior. It didn't stop there. Ben also revealed that Maddock had offered him some money after he had just shot Charlie to death. The evidence managed to make Maddock go to jail soon, while Ben could be free to do his normal activities. Unfortunately, Maddock, who initially says that he needed to go to the toilet for a while, turned out to have called someone to pick him up by helicopter. He had made the call as soon as he arrived at the office, and no one noticed it. That's where, in secret, he is already ordering his men with a smartwatch. A few days after the incident, Ben purposely followed his girlfriend, who was already living downtown. He also no longer wants to work as a guider due to the trauma of a previous incident. Unexpectedly, Ben dreamed that Maddock would follow him to the house. But it turned out that he had really arrived without them both knowing. Fortunately, Maddock's plan failed because Lena was already standby with a gun that she always carried when she slept. From there, Maddock couldn't do anything, which is where he died after being shot 3 times by Ben. And the film ends. To be honest, this film was able to make me feel tense without a lot of actors in each scene. Which for some reason, the environment that was created made us feel like we were in Ben's position. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Cinecaps for more such awesome content. Watch these videos for more such stuff.